Hi guys, welcome back to the channel and a big happy new year to you all. This is my first session of 2026, so I've come down to the reservoir to do a bit of dead baiting for pike. Nate's going to be joining me in a few hours time, but I've got down here a bit early to get the rods out and hopefully nick a fish early on. I've got 3 rods with me today. I'm going to have 2 on running ledger setups and 1 on a float setup as well. And on the float I've got an underwater camera on, so fingers crossed we'll get a bit of footage of a pike taking the hook bait. I've just got into my first swim. It's a swim I've had quite good success so far this season, so hope that continues and I can nick a bite early on. I will go into my tactics and my methods in a lot more detail throughout this session, but right now I need to get set up, get some baits in the water and see how this session unfolds. Right, I've got both my running ledger dead baits out in the water, and before I send the float setup out there, I thought I'd quickly run through exactly how I've set that up. There's a nice simple setup. Here I've got 2 float stops. I always use 2, just gives you that extra peace of mind it's not going to slip. You then see I've got a bead to protect the float against the float stops, a cheap old sea float, another bead, a weight and another bead, and then I've got my Western Cam underwater camera. Obviously I've got the lens facing down towards the bait. I've then got about 2.5 foot of a nice strong wire trace that comes down to 2 treble hooks that I've attached a sardine to. I've just had a bit of bait elastic to try and keep that in place. I'm not going to be casting this one far out, it's mainly be fishing closer in, so I'm not putting too much force into the cast, so that bait should stay on no problem at all. On my treble hooks, one of the hooks on each treble is barbed, which goes into the hook, and the other 2 hooks are barbless. So it's a nice simple setup. It's caught me quite a few nice fish already this season. This time obviously I've got the underwater camera on, so fingers crossed we'll get a bit of action of this pike coming in and taking this lovely smelly sardine. So I've got a nice gentle breeze pushing down to my left hand side. On both my ledger rods I'm fishing fairly central, so I'm just going to flick this out to the left hand side and let that drift down to the left. So it's not going to interfere with my ledger rods at all, it's not going to get tangled up. I'm fishing about 3 foot to start with, which should be about 2 foot off the bottom. With those float stops I can easily change the depth throughout the session, so I don't catch anything on my first cast, or will adjust it for my second cast until I catch a fish, and then hopefully I've found the right depth those fish are holding at this morning. Let's get the bait out there and see what happens. So in the few weeks leading up to Christmas, the fishing wasn't great down at the reservoir, to be honest. I was getting 1 or 2 fish a session, but I never got that real good hit, 5 or 6 fish during a session that you can get up here. And I think that's mainly down to the weather. It was changing pretty much every day. One day it was mild, it was wet. The next day it was freezing cold with bright blue skies. And I think the variable weather just put the pike off from having a really good feed. However, over the last couple of weeks it has been solidly cold, into single figures consistently, and hoping now that the fish will come onto a good feed and today we can pick up a couple of fish. I've just redone all the rods with some fresh baits, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to get some more rigs ready, some fresh baits on those rigs, so if I get a fish I can quickly change the rig over and get it back out there, or if I want to change my baits I can do so really quickly as well. You never know on the day what the pike are going to particularly fancy. So I brought a variety of baits with me today. I've got mackerel, I've got sardine, I've got whiting, and I've got some rudd as well. So I've got a nice mixture, different colours, different scents, different sizes. Mix it up, try and find out what those pike want. Right, I've let this bait on the float drift down this left-hand margin for about 20 minutes now. I've twitched it a couple of times and nothing's happened. In fact, it's caught in a little bit of weed now. So I'm going to bring it back in, I'm going to cast it a bit further out and let it drift further out as well. Now, there are a lot of trees above me on the bank there, You might have seen in some previous videos, I do occasionally get tangled up in those branches, so I'm wading out a little bit, cast out nice and safely, and then jump back out the water. Yeah, it's going to put a bit of distance on this one, let it drift further out. Right, so that's the float setup back out there. Let's take a quick look at this ledger setup before I cast that one back out as well. Right, so here's my running ledger setup for today's session. Starting with a stem that my lead attaches to, and that is free running up and down my braided main line. The idea of that is it helps keep the line out of the weed, because it is very weedy in this area of the reservoir. I then got my snap swivel, and that goes down to a nice long wire trace again. And I want my bait popped up, so I've got a nice big bit of mackerel here. Got some polyballs to pop that up with. That's onto a wire trace, which then attaches to that back treble hook. That's over buoyant, so that will float as long as that wire trace is. So what I've done is I've attached a few shot weight to balance that out. So that's going to slowly sit down, and it's going to be about 4 or 5 inches off the bottom. Okay, so those little shot weight will sit on top of the weed, and that bait will float just above it. I don't want any of those treble hooks coming into contact with the weed. It's going to affect my presentation and affect the chances of those hooks going to the pike's mouth. So quite a simple setup, just a couple of extras to combat that weed out there. Just starting to rain, we'll get the camera away, I'll get this cast back out. Right, it's about 2 hours into the session now and no action at all on any of the rods. So I'm deciding to mix things up a little bit with the bait. So far I've just been using sea baits, so some mackerel and sardine. They're nice oily, smelly baits that give off loads of attraction, but maybe the pike are more switched on to the natural bait in this reservoir. If that's the case, then hopefully they're going to take my little rod here. So I'm going to fish this on the float setup to begin with. Might also put one on a ledger rod as well. We'll start off on the float. Yeah, like I say, if the pike are more switched on to the natural bait in here, and that's what they're looking for, going for a more match the hatch approach might get me that bite. So this is the sort of weed I'm trying to combat on there. As you can see, there's loads around my lead. And there's just a little bit on the hook as well, but I think that's more when I'm dragging it back in, to be honest. I have checked this bait in the margins and it is sitting off the bottom by a couple of inches, so shouldn't be coming into contact with weed out there. I said that there's no bites or any sort of marks on the bait at all. So yeah, I think we're going to get a little bit more time, then we'll head off. But I'll get out there one more time, just in case there is a fish lurking about.
Nate soon arrived and we made the walk round to a swim where we could comfortably get all of our rods out together. This was a social session after all. Unfortunately, at this point, for whatever reason, my microphone decided to stop working, so the remainder of this video will have to be voiced over. Not long after casting out, I soon had a take on one of my ledger rods, fished with a whole sardine. But although I felt the fish on the strike, a few seconds later, the fish had dropped the bait. We kept fishing for another hour, but unfortunately we had no other action. That was until I looked back at my underwater footage and noticed that a pike did actually take my rod dead bait, but it quickly let go. Although it continued circling around the bait for a few more minutes, it never took that second bite. This made me question what happened. It was obviously very interested in the rod, and it took its first bite fairly quickly. It bit into the belly of the fish, so I don't think it felt any of the hooks, so I can only presume that it felt the resistance of the float and the camera, and that was enough to make it too wary to risk another attempt. We moved further up the bank into another fairly open swim, fishing with echelon bank sticks to help keep our line out of the remaining darn lilies that sat just in front of us. We kept active and kept moving the rods around, but after 90 minutes we packed up and made one last move before darkness fell. We moved to the dam end, where we knew there was very little weed, and it was also the calmest area of the reservoir that day, sheltered from the wind by the ancient trees and the steep banks. Perhaps some of the bait fish had sought protection and warmth there, and if we were lucky, the pike followed. This seemed to be the case, as only 2 minutes after casting out, one of my ledger rods was away. After losing a fish earlier, and with this probably being my final chance of a pike this session, I was so relieved to see it end up in the net. At first I thought it was a scraper double, but Nate convinced me to weigh it, and it was actually 14.5 pounds. I guess my guesstimates are a little bit off. The fish was rested and safe for the return, and although we fished on for another hour, that was the last of the action. It turned out to be quite a hard day. We could have easily been lazy and sat it out in one swim all day, and perhaps we might have still caught, but by putting in the effort, by moving swims frequently and recasting regularly, I feel the efforts were repaid. And that brings an end to this video. Just the one fish again, but a lovely double figure pike. Hopefully we've got a few more before the season ends. Don't forget to check out my other videos as well. Thank you very much for watching and for all your support recently. Hopefully I'll catch you guys again soon.